On our last program, we began a study I called The Anatomy of a Dream. The book of Genesis, in particular, gives us a series of dreams, and these are classic dreams. According to modern studies of dreams, these in the book of Genesis fit all of their molds. And I want you to notice that dreams and visions are replete throughout the Bible, though in the book of Genesis we have only 2 visions and 7 stories of dreams. And these dreams fit between the 2 visions. So we have here a menorah design and a Hanukkah menorah design, Gary. I want you to notice that according to statistics, the term vision occurs 86 times in the Old Testament, in the singular form 64 times, in the plural form 22 times. Almost a third of the times that visions are recorded in the Bible, 22 of them are in the book of Daniel, almost a third of the visions. 22 of them, the same number there are of letters in the Hebrew alphabet. And the term vision occurs 15 times in the New Testament, 11 of those in the book of Acts. And the term dream occurs only 7 times in the whole New Testament, and 7 times dreams are accounted for in the book of Genesis. 6 occur in the book of Matthew, 1 in the book of Acts. 5 of those dreams center around the birth of Christ. You remember the angel told Joseph not to worry about Mary being expecting a child. And then it went on to the various things. The wise men were warned against Herod's shenanigans and so on. The 6th dream was experienced by Pilate's wife, who told her husband not to have anything to do with this righteous man. And then the final dream is the quote of the prophecy from Joel's prophecy in Acts chapter 2, verse 17, where we're told that in the last days, old men will dream dreams. So welcome to the Old Codger's Prophecy Hour, Gary.
So are we dreaming dreams, JR, or are we just examining dreams? Well, you know, last time we talked about Abraham's visions. We talked about King Abimelech and how he was warned in a dream to have hands off Sarah. And Abimelech was an idolater. That is, he was a man who had a kingdom, and his word was law. But when he had the dream, the Lord warned him, release Sarah, or you're a dead man. And so the Lord speaks to all men in dreams, not just righteous men. And we find this several places in the Bible. Well, this brings us up to the time of Abraham and Isaac. And Isaac also experienced dreams.
Yes. Now, in the days of Abraham had 7 contacts with God. The first 3 were personal visits. The 4th one was a vision. The next 2 were personal visits. In fact, the 6th one, God brought along a couple of friends. Jehovah, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, the Lord came to him, and he had 2 companions, 2 angels, and of course they were going to go over and destroy the city of Sodom. And Abraham said, look, could you spare them if I could just find 10 righteous? And you know the story. But the interesting thing is the 2 angels went into Sodom and rescued Lot and his daughters. And this was a personal contact, Gary. This was not dreams and visions here. And so I think that is quite significant. But then we come to Isaac, as you suggested. Isaac, on the day that Rebekah came, was out in the field in the evening meditating. That means he was a man of prayer. He was communicating with God. And of course, there are a couple of times when God came to him. The first one in Genesis 26, the Lord appeared unto him and said, go down into Egypt, dwell in the land that I shall tell thee of. He stayed around Gerar. And this must have been a personal visit. The Lord appeared to him. But later, a few months later, after a day of arguing with some of the men of Gerar over the ownership of the water wells, he had a vision, or at least we think so. The Lord appeared to him in the same night. So, Gary, it was at nighttime. We're not told that it was a dream or a vision. It's just possible that it was. Or maybe the Lord came to him personally. But it was at night. That, I think, is significant.
And it's interesting that this came in the context of a famine. Genesis 26, there's a famine in the land, and this is a famine second to the one that happened in the days of Abraham. Isaac went unto Abimelech, king of the Philistines, unto Gerar, and the Lord appeared to him and said, Go not down into Egypt, dwell in the land which I shall tell thee of. And now this begins that, could we call this a vision? Is this a dream? What is this?
Well, it is not. It couldn't be classified as a dream or a vision because the term is not used there. Mm-hmm. But it does happen at night, and I think that's rather interesting there.
It is.
And there's another time when Isaac prays for his wife because she's barren. And the Lord blesses him then with twins, Jacob and Esau. When Isaac is an old man and blind, he makes a dreadful mistake, at least what appears to be a mistake. He gives the family blessing to the wrong son. And this brings us then to the story of Jacob. The vision and dreams of Jacob. Fascinating. Jacob leaves home. He goes out toward Padan Aram. He's going on his way to Laban's house because of the problems with his brother. His brother wants to kill him at this point. But he stops for the night at a place later called Bethel, meaning the house of God. And there he dreams a dream. This is the classic dream of the book of Genesis. In this dream, he sees a ladder stretched from earth to heaven. And on the ladder, angels are going up and down from heaven to earth and earth to heaven. And we are not told the meaning of this dream. But here, for the first time, Gary, a dream has more than just God speaking personally to the man's brain. God has actually introduced symbols, a ladder, and angels.
And you know, J.R., in the Hebrew of this passage, some have suggested that the word ladder might well be translated staircase or stairway. In other words, we're talking about a pathway from earth to heaven with angels going up and down upon it.
More like a 6-lane highway, wasn't it?
Yeah, indeed, indeed. It was a huge pathway of some sort. And in this dream, it looks as though the subject of redemption is being spoken of in the large scale. In other words, a connection between heaven and earth. A lot of people have suggested the ladder is a type of Christ, the one who bridges the gap between heaven and earth.
And you know, we're not told what the ladder means. I see it as a tremendous amount of activity between heaven and earth. You know, don't we all have guardian angels? You know, the population of the earth was growing at that time, and I imagine this 2-lane highway became a 6-lane highway, and it may be a 20-lane highway today, I don't know. But it does seem to note activity between heaven and man.
The message fascinates me, because here in Genesis 28, 13 and 14, the Lord begins to speak to him. I'm the Lord God of Abraham thy father, the God of Isaac. The land whereon thou liest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed. And thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth. And I'll just stop right there rather than reading the rest of it, because this is discussing the promised seed, which goes all the way back to that prophecy in Genesis about the seed of the woman, or shall we say the seed of the Messiah coming out of the household of Abraham.
Yes.
And so that dream, J.R., is an important message to Jacob. It tells him who he is.
Yeah. Now, this dream has 2 classic components to it. One, symbols, but secondly, a revelation from God. God thinks it's important enough to stand above that ladder, even though there's a lot of activity between the population on planet Earth and the population of guardian angels in heaven. God stops long enough to say, Jacob, you're special. I'm going to save the world through you and your posterity. I think that's most interesting, most important. Now, the next dream we have is when Jacob gathers his wives, I guess 20-something years later, and he says, we need to leave. we got problems coming. We need to leave. And let me tell you why I've got all this big herds of cattle, and your father Laban is just left with scrawny stuff. He said, I had a dream one time that I was going to get all of the ring-straked and grizzled cattle, all of the speckled cattle. He says, I had a dream. I saw it in a dream. Well, we know the shenanigans, you know, he went through with all those rods of poplar wood and chestnut and so on. But he could have saved himself all that trouble. The dream, he thought, was an idea. And that brings us to the concept of dreams that provide ideas and inspiration. We'll talk about that when we return in just a moment. In Genesis chapter 31, verse 10, Jacob gathers his wives around him and says, It came to pass at the time that the cattle conceived that I lifted up mine eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which leaped upon the cattle were ring-straked, speckled, and grizzled. Now, Gary, we know that he got these rods of poplar wood and chestnut and so on, and hazel, and put them down, you know, and supposedly he'd put them down when the strong cattle were about to conceive, but when some old weakling came along, he just removed the rods and let Laban have them. Well, this was hocus pocus stuff. We know that. So the dream really wasn't an idea maker, but he thought it was.
Actually, though, God could have been giving him some notion of crossbreeding here, because he saw in his dream cattle which had certain markings, patterns, and which gave him the notion, you know, maybe I can control a little bit of the breeding here. Yeah. He was given, in other words, an idea that could be applied to everyday life.
Yeah. Now, as I looked into what the Association for the Study of Dreams had to say about dreams of our modern day, they mentioned that scientific studies of the dreams talk about studies of these dreams are useful to understand one's feelings, thoughts, and motives. It is said that the interpretation of dreams is sometimes found to be helpful in solving problems. And they said artists, writers, scientists, and I add theologians, reportedly have received ideas from their dreams. Many of the modern developments in technology have been attributed to ideas that just seem to pop into a scientist's mind in the moments before waking up. So in other words, up until the last century, the fastest thing man had was a horse and buggy, but men began to invent things and ideas began to pop into men's minds. Just as Daniel chapter 12 verse 4 says, in the last days knowledge shall be increased.
And the Lord brought a lot of that knowledge, I'm convinced, and in dreams. There are many stories about inventors who dream something and then they try it out in their lab, and lo and behold, it works. James Watt, a Christian, invented the steam engine, which brought the Industrial Revolution to England. James Watt was a preacher, he was a hymn writer, he was a devoted man, and he connected the idea of steam lifting the lid of a kettle to steam doing work. Well, JR, the Romans had kettles with lids.
Yes.
They had, the Romans invented the crankshaft, the piston.
Yes.
They understood all of those principles, but they never put it all together and made a steam engine. It waited, I think, through the will of God until the righteous man, James Watt, received a sort of a vision, if you will, invented the steam engine, which revolutionized Britain.
And most of the inventions, the developments in technology today, many of them are attributed to the dream state, as people get these ideas and then develop them. And I must confess, I've had thoughts in my waking moments, you know, in the dream state just before waking up. I often wake up with an idea for a study in eschatology.
Absolutely. The Lord will put Scripture into your mind in the semi-waking state. And you'll wake up and say, you know, I better check that out. That was interesting.
Yeah. Well, then we come to the dream of Laban. Laban, by the way, didn't need any symbols. the dream that Jacob had had, this idea-getting dream, this inspirational type dream is most popular and common, especially in the last century or so. But Laban, he was an unsaved man, an idol worshiper. He didn't have time to figure out. God didn't have time to give him symbols to try to figure out. So God came to him directly and he said, "You leave Jacob alone." You see, he was pursuing after Jacob and his family, and he was conjuring up all kinds of mean things he was going to do to him, and God says, "Don't you speak either evil or good to him." And that sort of slowed down his pace a bit, didn't it?
It did indeed. Again, we see that the Lord speaks not just to righteous men, but to key people at key historical moments. And we have this all the way through the Bible.
You know, had it not been for Jacob and his plotting against God's man, God probably never would have come to Laban. Laban didn't deserve a dream. But when you're about to touch God's people, better watch out. God's watching you, whoever you are. So touch not mine anointed, the Bible says. And Laban was about to do that. Well, let's talk about the heavenly wrestler here, because this was no dream, Gary. A dream can't put a hand into your thigh and cripple you for life.
Absolutely not. We have Jacob bringing his family back. And it's kind of fascinating. Genesis 46:2, "And God spake unto Israel," that is Jacob, "in the visions of the night, and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here am I. And he said, I am God, the God of thy father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will there make of thee a great nation." Now, again, another key moment, a key position in history. And the vision of the night, J.R., is that a dream? What is that?
That's a vision.
Okay.
We have a vision to Abraham in chapter 15 and a vision to Jacob in chapter 46, and between them we have 7 stories of dreams. So the visions are important. They are different from dreams, and they sort of cap the dream development that God is doing here with people. And so we've covered the life of Jacob. Let's talk about Joseph in the few moments we have remaining, because this is most important. First of all, Joseph has a dream, and he has 2 dreams actually in the same night. He dreams of the sheaves of the field, and they all bow down to his sheaf. He dreams of the stars, the constellations, and they fall down in obeisance to his star. But his brothers hate him for that. Do you ever have a dream and try to tell somebody about it? They look at you, you know, like you're crazy. That's what happened to Joseph and his dream.
Indeed. And, you know, the idea of the dream and Joseph, J.R., is more than just a local dream. Joseph's dreams reach all the way through the Bible.
Yes.
They literally reach to the book of Revelation, if you will, and they have to do with the sovereignty of God's purpose in the 12 tribes.
This was a prophetic dream.
Yes.
The latter Jacob dreamed was a prophetic dream, and this dream of Joseph was a prophetic dream. Later, when Pharaoh has a dream, and Pharaoh dreams of 7 good years followed by 7 years of famine. He dreams it in 2 different dreams. First, he dreams of cattle as 7 good cows, and then 7 lean cows come up and devour the 7 bad cows. Then he dreams of ears of corn, and 7 evil ears of corn come and devour the 7 good ears of corn. 2 different kinds of symbols here. But Gary, Joseph's dream were the sheaves and the stars. Pharaoh's dream was of the cattle and the corn. And Joseph said to Pharaoh, this was a double dream, signifying that it was from God. Now, this is interesting. When you have 2 different symbols denoting the same prophecy, then that is the symbolized that it is from God.
And once again, J.R., we see that not only can the dreams come to the righteous or God's anointed like Joseph, they can also come to evil people like Pharaoh.
Yes. Yeah, Pharaoh was not a believer.
Yeah.
But he was a king. And you know, God sends dreams to kings. King of Abimelech of Gerar, King Nebuchadnezzar, he was not a dedicated believer. But he was a ruler of people, and who knows but what other kings and presidents and leaders of nations, even in modern times, have received inspirations from God.
No doubt about it. Well, as we look into dreams, we're just getting into the interesting part now. This study has got to continue because we haven't scratched the surface yet.
Indeed. So as we learn more about it, we'll bring it along to you. But you know, Joseph, because he interpreted Pharaoh's dream, became the governor of the land. He was put in charge of carrying out the taxing of the people's crops. Fascinating. We'll be back in just a moment. Remember, we need to hear from you in order to keep this program on the air. So we're offering last year's magazines, January through December 2003, for $12. I hope you'll get these. If you don't have them, or if you've misplaced some, or if you'd like to get them for your pastor or church library, they're here for you. But we also offer 5 years, 60 magazines. All of our research for the past 5 years, what a wealth of information is here. If you'll get them, you can get all 5 years, 60 magazines for $50, plus shipping and handling, and we'll send you Beyond Iraq, The Next Move by Michael Evans. Sells in our magazine for $9.95. I hope you'll get it. Gary?
Yeah, and JR, by the way, that book on Iraq is very timely. Prophetic Study of Babylon.
Yeah. And maybe you'll subscribe to our magazine. This is J.R. Church and Gary Stearman. Until next time, keep looking up.
Prophecy in the News is a viewer-supported ministry sponsored by our many friends across America and in your area. For your gift of $10, you can receive a special edition of our current program on audio tape, or for a gift of $20, we'll send you our programs on videotape. For either order, call the 800 number on your screen right now.